Fantastic. Okay. Well, we are an accelerator. I was just informed that our 30-minute panel is going to be achieved in 20 minutes. So that's true to form. But welcome, everyone. I'm Philip Kirchhoff, CEO and co-founder of Startup Bootcamp Afritech. We scout, skill, and scale the most disruptive African startups. And we are a Pan-African program originally out of Cape Town. We now have a campus in Dakar. And since 2017, we've accelerated 60 African startups. So the panel today is really talking about ecosystem development. And just in the interest of time, I'm going to kind of jump down the line. But we will we'll have everyone introduce themselves for 1 minute or less. And then we're going to jump into some rapid-fire questions to make sure that you have the opportunity to talk about how do we grow this ecosystem in Tunisia, but really a Pan-African ecosystem. So, to my right.
Should I introduce myself
Please.
first?
1 minute.
Okay. I'm Shaima Soudani, investment manager at Caisse des Dépôts et Consignations, and I'm part of the team that manages the World Bank project, Innovative Startup and SMEs, which is a 75 fully funded World Bank project.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be part of this panel. My name is Marwa, Program Manager at Innovation City. I manage the startup accelerator called AI Factory, which is an AI-focused startup accelerator. As part of what I do is basically I have a 360 degrees aspects of the different program operations. I also intervene in startup support. From the initial assessment phase all the way through the acceleration journey, so I get to see the impact our program has not only on the startup but also on the founders, which is very motivating for me. Thank you.
Hi everybody, I'm excited to be here because it's my first time in Tunis. My name is Pumlani and I'm from South Africa. I am a director of a new center at Stellenbosch University called Allen Gray Center for Africa Entrepreneurship, and an executive at an accelerator called Jasiri, which is focused in producing high-impact entrepreneurs in Kenya, Rwanda, and Ethiopia. Thank you.
And hi, everyone. Also excited to be here as it's my first time in Tunisia. Hi, Robert Haney with FMO, and I'm on the programmatic technical assistance side of FMO, which is the group that handles projects focused on upstream kind of ecosystem development. And I am here really under the Ventures program, which is a fund within FMO, and it's really the consolidation of our VC-focused work. And I lead the ecosystem building component of that program. So I have a couple other key projects, but I'll leave it there for now.
So I think just because you've already got the mic, we'll start with your end. And Rob, maybe just picking up on what you're saying about the ecosystem play and wearing all these different hats. But FMO obviously is a very large organization, and you support many things. You sponsor Africa Arena. Maybe highlight a little bit more about your emphasis and how you are working with ESOs and what role you see those organizations playing in growing the ecosystem, and in where's FMO, how do you fit into that whole picture?
Yeah, sure, and a little more context on FMO and the Ventures program, as I mentioned, because this is relatively new. We started this about 3 years ago, which is really the formalization of our work in the earlier stage investing space. So it has a 200 million euro investment arm, and then running alongside of that is a technical assistance facility. And I lead that ecosystem building component of that technical assistance facility. And so this kind of work within ecosystem development is still new to us, and we're on a learning journey. And so we've been trying to kind of experiment with how to do that. And there's many different ways, but our approach being a relatively small funded program, we're not trying to start something new per se or set up operations in any one country. So it's really about working through partners, through ESOs, entrepreneur support organizations, to really help in developing that pipeline for, yes, perhaps us, as we look at what are these potential investment opportunities, but for the broader community, and how do we help crowd in more attention and more investors to these underserved markets. And so, yeah, I think one of our key approaches was, let's look, just starting in Africa, which is where our technical assistance facility focuses because of where the money comes from. But looking at Africa, how do we go beyond the big four markets and look at the middle tier markets to help in trying to be more catalytic in these markets? And so we've started to prioritize a few and are now starting to work with some local partners. But it's around this theme of supporting local ESOs and accelerators and connecting them with the kind of follow-on investment and resources needed to help ventures scale from those locations, while at the same time working with more established and regional accelerators and helping them expand into these markets perhaps faster than they could do on their own. And that brings us to how we have partnered with Startup Bootcamp and Philip and his team on what they're doing out of Senegal now. So yeah, I guess I'll leave it there.
Which we very much appreciate, of course. I don't want to take any of the time, but yeah, it's been fantastic working, and I will dive into that a bit more. Maybe to Phumlani, Dr. Phumlani. You mentioned something earlier to me about just an interesting data point about your research and where Tunisia stacks up on the continent. Maybe that would be, I'd love that as a lead-in point that might actually surprise, maybe we could almost do it as a poll, but see what people's perspective is in terms of Tunisia and the AI-backed and the AI space.
Yeah, I mean, you've mentioned the big four markets, which are well known. We call it in the research community the innovation quadruple, which is Kenya, Egypt, South Africa, and Nigeria. And what we saw last year for the first time was kind of a slight dethroning, this concept of a top six for the first time. And that's because of what happened here with InstaDeep. Of course, the InstaDeep exit was huge, but of course Tunisia will produce more in the future. But what is interesting about Tunisia is this notion of sub-ecosystems. So when we talk about ecosystems in Africa, we almost bundle them into one concept, much like how people think of Africa. But really, how entrepreneurship will grow in Africa is through sub-ecosystems. And Tunisia's sub-ecosystem is deep tech. And interestingly, if you take 100 firms, in 3-4 years' time, you'll be lucky to have 10, and 7 years later, you'll be lucky to exit one business. And that is just generic. And deep tech is a very niche within that, very niche at the end. So interestingly, in the continent, only 5% of startups are built on deep tech. That's a continental average. And Tunisia's portfolio is 3 times that average. That is an amazing statistic and an amazing testament to how data and how the engineering and how the deep tech here in Tunisia is really leading the continent. And that has a lot of fringe benefits, because if people trust you with one sub-ecosystem, they'll then trust you with others. So this is really a very big privilege for me to be here.
Yeah, that's really amazing. And I mean, like I said, I was astonished. I mean, of course, we all know InstaDeep, but it's fascinating to think about. It's not that one outlier company that did it. You're saying it's 15% of all the investment. So actually to you then, because you run an accelerator or you run a set of programs basically bringing up the next generation of future InstaDeeps. So maybe tell us a little bit more about what's the secret? How are you achieving that? How are you helping to get to that 15%?
All right, thank you. First of all, thank you, Phumlani, for the statistics. That's very positive. So since you mentioned InstaDeep, with the AI Factory program, we are lucky enough to be working with InstaDeep. They are providing us with their mentorship, not us directly, but for the startups, for the AI startups, and that's very important for early stage AI startups. So how about we start by talking about what do early stage AI startups need in Tunisia? So in the AI Factory program, we have run the first cohort so far. We have a second cohort. In the first cohort, we had 18 AI startups that joined the program initially, but we've selected only 6 startups that received the acceleration. And so with these startups, every startup has its unique goals and its unique startup needs. But generally speaking, these startups at the early stage, sometimes they come with their MVP, sometimes they come with their prototype, but it's not always the case. And so with our AI experts, we really try to help them validate their AI solutions. Even if they come with their MVP, we really try to help them achieve their product market fit. And so that's the first thing. The second thing is, which is really important, as soon as they enter our program, what we do is that we try to make business and technical assessment for the startup, not just for eliminatory reasons, but also to assess the maturity of startups and work around our roadmap together. That's very useful for the next stage, which is the acceleration stage. So the assessment is very important. It allows us to really understand the maturity and also match the startup with the right mentors and experts. Some startups, for example, they are expanding, so they need coaching or mentorship in agile management. Some other startups that are trying to validate their product, so they need coaching or how do I say this, expertise in UX, UI, so that's very important. So yeah, in the first cohort, we did assessment in terms of product, which is super important for an early stage startup. We also help entrepreneurs really unlock their potential in terms of pitching, which is super important. During the acceleration phase, we don't just focus on pitching in general, but really prepare the startup for investment readiness. So we provide them with investment readiness training to help the startup really, how do I say this, perfect their investor pitch. Because early stage startups, usually they're bootstrapping, they haven't raised funds yet. So to raise seed level fundraising, they need to be able to know which documents, which financial documents need to have in place, documentation, investor pitch, their go strategy needs to be clear. So what I'm trying to say for early stage AI startups, exposure is really important. We help them not only connect them with local network, but also on an international level. Some of our startups, they took part in international events like GITEX, Africa, where they got to meet, in Morocco, where they got to meet other AI startups. This really helped them not only meet potential investors or prospects, but also meet other AI startups in their fields to help them do a benchmark. So that's a really important thing.
Fantastic. Well, I mean, it's an amazing program, and I think it's a perfect lead-in because, of course, all this pitching, what does the startups ultimately want? They want to raise capital. So let's talk about the money. And now you mostly don't invest directly. It's mostly through investments into funds. So perhaps share a bit about your strategy for growing the venture ecosystem and the venture capital layer in Tunisia.
Okay, thank you. Actually, CDC started investing in VCs, I think, since 2015 with the 2 VC funds. And for these VC funds, actually, CDC invested indirectly. But with the creation of Anava Fund of Fund, and actually we are one of the LPs of Anava Fund of Fund, we are no more dealing with VC funds directly, so it's through Anava that VC funds are created and VC investments are offered to the local actors in Tunisia. Just to tell you that we are we are supporting startups and startups ecosystem through different instruments. For instance, with the World Bank project, which is a program of $75 million. We have two funds. The first one is Anava Fund of Fund, and our contribution through the World Bank is $40 million. And second fund is Innovatech, which is a fund for innovative SMEs, not for startups. And we have actually another program, which is called Flywheel. And Flywheel is co-founded by World Bank through the project Innovative Startup and SMEs and the GIZ. This program actually offers different instruments for startups and SSOs. For startups, we have two instruments. First one is AIR, which is a grant of 30,000 dinars for early stage startups. And the second one is R2, R2, which is a 200,000 dinars grant. And it's for investment readiness for startups. And actually, we also we support SSOs through a grant, 200,000 grant for SSOs to launch new programs for startups. And actually, we have other programs that we manage with Expertise France and AFD. And these programs are also for startups and for entrepreneurship in Tunisia.
And I think what's most impressive for us is, we spend a lot of time on the whole continent. We scout in nearly every country, and we're very dialed into the ecosystems. But Tunisia, as you were saying, it really broke out. It kind of came out of nowhere and stepped into. It was the very first with the Startup Act. Maybe back to you a little bit about, from your perspective. We hear a lot about AI-based startups, but AI is not an industry in and of itself. What are some of the interesting problems that your startups are really solving, the ones that are at the high end of your programs?
Exactly. So not all of our startups that join the program are AI-based. They actually operate in different fields, including retail, energy, including e-mobility, including agri-tech. And so some of these startups are 100% AI or machine learning based, but most of them actually just use artificial intelligence for the common good or to have an impact. For example, one of the startups that does both, that uses artificial intelligence but also has an impact on the environment, is called RoboCare. So this startup is not only it's led by a female founder, which we really support that, but they also made a lot of progress during the program. So RoboCare actually, they have a platform for farming, for farmers, and they use satellite data, drone images, IoT sensors to really help the farmers tackle climate change or tackle the effects of climate change. And by using this platform, farmers have estimations on harvest crops, or they can also really improve their production, which is super important. This is a very important field in Tunisia. So yeah, during this program, RoboCare, they came in with an MVP, but they also were able to validate their product or achieve what we call product maturity.
Brilliant. And Dr. Poulami, so you've got the benefit of kind of Pan-African view. You've said you've done a lot of research, but you also have this emphasis in East Africa. Maybe just some thoughts on, are there any differences between the challenges you're seeing in East Africa and here, and how is the accelerator and the support programs that you're offering, how is that helping startups to kind of bridge that gap?
Yeah, what we're seeing is this trend of sub-ecosystems, as I was mentioning, but as an executive of another fund, which is Jasiri, it's called Jasiri in East Africa. You can check out jasiri.org. So Jasiri is an East African word meaning brave. So it's essentially a talent investor / venture investor and also an ecosystem builder. So we've got three components. in the Talent Investor, we basically take talent across Africa, and they can be diaspora. The only catch is that they must go to Kigali for 3 months in that what we call a Talent Investor residential program. And there they can come with an idea or not, but in that 3 months, they basically have to co-create a venture and also find a team, a colleague or a co-founder. And 3 months later, we give them 10,000 USDs, and they have 9 months to then do what we call venture building. This is still the incubation component, and if they do well, they can get up to 75,000 USDs, all grants. We have an equity option, and we are essentially also a sister fund of funds for other organizations that we're part of that are backed up by Allan Gray. So we are sector agnostic, and we have some AI firms, but we also have other firms solving different problems. So in the current cohort, we've got 12 industries that are being targeted, from e-mobility to agri-tech to health tech. This year, for the first time, we have asset management in our portfolio, and so we're very much sector agnostic.
Fantastic. So maybe with Robert, I know we're gonna run out of time, and we'll take some questions before we do. But AI is not one of your sectors. So how does this, being here and kind of being in the epicenter for African AI, what do you see as the opportunities in Tunisia, regional, and overlap with the sectors that are really important to FMO?
Yeah, and starting with that last bit, under the Ventures program, our sectors of focus are fintech, agri-tech, and energy access. And those three align to what our broader FMO organization focuses on in terms of the industries. And yeah, I think we're starting to see AI across different elements of these sectors and investments that we're making. So I think we're still learning in terms of how we want to focus on this, and I have to defer to the investment leads for each of those portfolios on how they're starting to approach this. But this is still new territory for us, and I think this in kind of, I guess, more of a later stage investing perspective, as we look at scalable models, and so I think it's still early days in some sense of the words. But maybe back to your second or first part of your question around ecosystem building. And I think what has been enlightening the past few days, being here in Tunisia and really seeing an ecosystem that is emphasizing that and see it supporting success models, local success models, and realizing the importance of, or the time that we're at in terms of the importance we need to be placing on supporting the infrastructure for deep tech and AI ecosystem growth across the continent. And so, I really take that to heart in terms of how I'll go forward and work with colleagues on looking at our own approach and strategy, and perhaps trying to weave that in a bit more. But it's still early days in some sense, but at the same time, I'm really getting a sense of the urgency of us supporting that, because of course, just that the hyper speed in which these technologies are developing.
I appreciate the urgency. And the other thing I'll say is, with working with FMO, a little bit of a plug for everybody, but when we first started working with you, there was like an opportunity on a specific project that you then said, hey, there's actually something that's even better, or there's a different way that we can work together. And we really co-created that. And I think that's really what I appreciate about FMO, is this agility and this, you're much more of a lean startup friendly organization. Certainly there is, by the way, if anybody does work with them, there is a process, right? So don't expect overnight decisions, but we have seen that. And that's why, seeing you here in a market that might not be at the top of the priority list, saying, hey, I'm open, I'm curious, and you taking that back. So that's really been great. But I also wanted to maybe, and we'll start to poll if there's any questions. But maybe you talked about this urgency, and this is something that I think is near and dear to my heart, but also here, that the conversations throughout the day have highlighted that these large language models and the chat GPTs and whatever are not, they can only learn, and the AI is generating new AI. So now it's becoming kind of self-generating, which means that kernel becomes exponentially more important. How do we get to ensure, and it was commented that there's very little African languages or literature or data and context, and that means if a year from now, if we're still sitting here talking about this, we would have mostly missed the boat, right? That rocket ship is so fast. What are your thoughts on what kind of interventions can we be doing yesterday to ensure that we are not left behind, that Africa is not trailing, and that there's an impossible gap forming between where we are today and that. So I'll let anybody want to answer that, and then if there's a question in the audience, I don't know if there's a roving mic, but maybe just put up a hand, and if there's not one, I'll bring it out to you. But while you're pondering your question, we'll take that one. Anybody that wants to answer that.
Well, look, I think in terms of ecosystem building, it's a thing that takes multiple players and multiple approaches to come together. And I think this is just another new and very important element that we need to be thinking about as a piece of that puzzle, and really prioritizing it faster than we all are to figure out how is that another key piece, and perhaps one of the most important pieces in ecosystem building. And I would say, who are the top lead players, entities that are embracing it and doing it well from whatever angle, and figuring out how to collaborate with them, right? Every organization brings its own skill set and its own approach, but it's all about figuring out how to work together to kind of bring these.
Shama, maybe is CDC prioritizing this as a portion?
Actually, we're not prioritizing any sector so far, but I might say that CDC is prioritizing the development of Tunisia. So I think it's through innovation that Tunisia can go faster in its development, surely. But there is no focus on a prior sector.
Got it. Okay. Same question before. I mean, like, how do we not get left behind?
So yeah, from my perspective, we're really helping the startups scale up by connecting them with our corporate partners. For example, we're working with NVIDIA Inception Program. So our startups get the resources they need. For example, they get free cloud resources, and they also get free online training, everything related to AI. So that's super important for early stage AI startups. And we also try at Novation City to create synergies between startups, industrials, and the academia, really to help startups and the entire ecosystem thrive.
Okay, Dr. Pumlani.
I was going to just say that...
Because you do have a VC fund attached to you, right? So you could be investing.
That's right. So I think that, and I've been mentioning this in a few conversations, that Africa needs to start thinking about funds of funds and hubs of hubs. There's just too little. We can name them in one hand or two hands at best across the continent. Why am I mentioning this? It's very expensive to produce an AI-based or deep tech-based startup and venture in Africa. The lead time is long, the progression framework is longer compared to software firms or any low-tech sort of base firms. Why is that interesting? If it's expensive, the question becomes, how do you make it cheaper for us to produce an AI-backed firm? Because if we don't do that and the transaction costs are higher, then any normal, rational human being is going to want to get that money back 10 years later, quicker. And we're going to be basically demand-orientated and look to Europe and America to get back our money. But if we approach AI from a patient capital point of view, we can have a learning program. We can train our programs based on the African consumers and potentially use access to market strategies such as corporations, big corporations consuming this, and our governments. You look at, for example, AI, health tech-based AI. They're selling their technologies outside, but we have health problems in Africa. So if our governments could start consuming that technology much more, but they don't have, so we still are basically consumer sort of orientated. But if we shift that and use governments and use big corporations, we can potentially get our money back slower, but if it's cheap, we can do it. So basically, sooner or later, we need to think about business unusual approaches that can help this.
Yes, I have a question for you guys. It's an observation / a question. When I think of AI and more generally tech innovation, I feel like something new is happening today compared to the last century, and it's quite important to ask the question, is that in the last century, basically the institutions or organizations that were providing new technologies to the world were mostly public, like government backed, or it was from the military, and these guys have a different approach to this kind of technologies, and they are in the position of wondering about the long-term impact that can have, that the technology can have on life, etc. And even the way that it was tested in small, not small, but isolated industries, and tested before it is deployed to the civil world. Now it seems that civilian tech is, for the first time in history, evolving much faster than the technology that is provided by the former technology providers. And that brings the question, because most of the, I see that the word tech players is here, so I will use it. Most of the tech players today are not designed to think about this, to ask these long-term questions and all these ethics that is related to this. And so I just wanted to have your point of view on whether asking the question of the rhythm and pace of technology development seems relevant, or how can we, from an ecosystem perspective, maybe try to manage and reduce the risk that might be that might come with this new change. Thanks.
Cool. I'm going to take this because it's linked with the point that I was just raising, and the mic is geographically close to me, so I'm going to monopolize it. But that's the point, is you're not the first one, and it's a very good question that ecosystems are not asking, but you're not the first one that has been asking this question in the last 5 years. Are we doing this too fast? And the answer is yes, and it's based on the Silicon Valley way of doing things, and it's a massive risk, and it's the point I was trying to make about patient capital. So the reference you're making is how tech in the US was made. It will be a firm that was selected carefully, and the tech will go to the military and tested all these things we know today, drones and all of that, for years, and all the defects and the failures and all of that will be learned, and when it's safe for us to consume, it will then be commercialized through a firm we know as Microsoft or a firm we know as whatever else, right? That is not happening now. So it goes back to the fact that if we don't take a community approach or a hub-of-hub approach, it's going to be expensive for anyone to do this, any investor, any hub, and so obviously the commercial model is going to demand that we, but it's a huge issue.
Yeah, I did want to comment because I think your question gets to something I think it's important that we all remind ourselves of, right? There, especially from a VC perspective, you have high growth ventures, tech ventures, and I think in one way, AI and deep tech is maybe accelerating that chasm between that kind of venture and the other kind of foundational, small businesses that are out there, livelihood businesses. There's different ways to categorize them that are a big part of lots of ecosystems. And I think in some way we're seeing AI is perhaps enabling that digitization of some of the, let's say, more infrastructure-based businesses. And so I think it'll be interesting to continue to think from an investor perspective of then how are we looking at those with scale potential. And so I think we're at an interesting influx right now with the new tech.
Yeah, one of the really fascinating things is this whole new, we'll say, capability or job description of prompt engineers, right? How many of you are familiar with this term of prompt engineers, right? So basically, everybody's played around with ChatGPT. You go and you put in a prompt. It's just like a search tool, it's a search bar. But once you know how to ask the right questions and to put in the right prompts, this tool it's infinitely capable. You can build yourself entire databases, entire websites, entire services, apps. They will generate all the code for you. So you no longer need to be doing the code yourself. You don't even have to know how to write code. You just have to know how to write the right prompts. And so that's a great opportunity to level the playing field. That you can learn to be a prompt engineer in a matter of a couple weeks, whereas coding might take you 6 months or a year. And so one of the things why we're trying to just really kick everybody into high gear is to say that if we start training at a very, very low cost, these prompt engineers, anybody, you don't even need like math skills or anything. You just need the right impetus. And if we can do that, then we can create this, I don't say army, but this force of Africans that are living, breathing, eating, sleeping these challenges and have the tool to now go out and create their whole service, their whole app, the whole solution without needing nearly so much funding, although of course we want that at the scale stage, but the solutions can actually be in the market very, very rapidly. And that's, I think, the hope for me is that we really start to push for that almost at the groundswell level. And then all of these organizations that are up here can kick in and can support all of they can take it from there to the ideation stage, to the next levels, and ultimately up to the VC level. But so that maybe I'll just finish on that. Do we have time for any more questions? Or are we?
Sorry.
Okay, great. Okay, well then, can I please get a big round of applause for our amazing panel?
Bravo.
Thank you for all of the amazing work that you're doing for Tunisia. So, okay.
And thank you, Philip Kirchhoff.